Good evening, America, and welcome to your Thursday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you as always from Washington, D.C. It's the second day since we discovered that the FBI had more than 40, that's right, you heard me right, more than 40 confidential human sources informing the agency about possible criminal activity involving the Biden family. Nevertheless, most avenues for investigation into the family were thwarted, according to Senate Judiciary Committee member Chuck Grassley. And that very fact was backed up last night when we broke the story of the Pittsburgh U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, who revealed to the House Judiciary Committee that his team found enough credible evidence in its initial review of Hunter Biden's dealings with the Burisma Holdings Company to warrant a corruption investigation of Joe Biden. Remember the informant, the 1023 informant? Well, he referred those criminal matters to 3 separate U.S. attorneys, but didn't find any interest level, including at the FBI, where he said the relationships were extraordinarily difficult. The FBI didn't seem to want to investigate Joe or Hunter Biden in the middle of the election. We've got a great show today, including Jason Foster from the Empower Oversight Whistleblower Center, who, of course, represents some of the whistleblowers, both in the FBI and the IRS, that have been key to the Biden case. But first, as we always do at this time in the show, I want to bring in my amazing co-host, Amanda Head from Los Angeles, to bring us up to speed on all the other things going on. Amanda, very busy news day today, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we are hitting the ground running. It is the 19th day of the war between Hamas and Israel, and with the installation of a new House Speaker, the chamber came together last night to approve a resolution backing Israel while simultaneously condemning Hamas. And just as we heard directly from Georgia Congresswoman MTG last night, the House Oversight member went to the House floor today to introduce a resolution to censure Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Now, as for now, the House will have 2 legislative days to vote for or against the Detroit-based Democrat unless something changes. Meanwhile, out in Arizona, their 2022 Republican Senate nominee Blake Masters has thrown his hat into the political arena once again, this time in an effort to beat his fellow Republicans, including a pomade for Congresswoman Debbie Lesko's seat. Now, Lesko announced she would not be seeking re-election in 2024, just over a week ago, actually. And in other news, crime is on the rise, and police forces in major cities continue to struggle with their recruiting. Nevertheless, the job still has to get done, and therefore, the D.C. Metropolitan Police found over 40 officers within their force cashing in on overtime and earning more than $100,000. I get a hold of this, Sean. According to local analysis, 33-year department veteran Sergeant Tony Giles earned nearly $250,000 in overtime pay alone, on top of his base salary of $114,000 that year. I guess if they offered that kind of money to every recruit, it wouldn't be a problem for them. And if, demonizing police, that probably doesn't help with recruitment either.
That's really been the problem. This was a self-made crisis by Democratic cities that turned down their police officers, and now they can't find, they have those who are retired and those who don't want to join the job, and it's put them into a budget crunch. Meanwhile, we have some other news on the Hunter Biden front. Today, the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, just on the show a couple days ago, said his committee doesn't possess any bank records to show that President Biden ever gave a loan to his brother, James, and he asked the president to produce documentation why James Biden paid the president $200,000 shortly after getting the same amount of money from a failing healthcare company. We're going to have a lot more on that. But tonight, we're going to kick off our show with a little bit of alarm. I mean, a fire alarm, as in the fire alarm that Congressman Jamal Bowman pulled just a few weeks ago. He has now pled guilty to the charges, and there are now bigger and bigger questions about what was really going on. We have the perfect first guest to get us up to speed on it. He's the chairman of the House Administration Committee, which is in charge of all things Congress and administration. He is Wisconsin Congressman Brian Steil, and he rejoins us. Congressman, great to have you on the show, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
We now have video footage. We now have a guilty plea. We now have a fine and an apology. But do you really feel like we have the real story about Jamal Bowman yet?
Well, it's pretty clear Jamal Bowman wasn't telling the truth when he issued his first excuse that he did this by accident. And the video proves that. He walks up to the door, he pushes the door, knocks down a few signs, turns to his left, pulls the fire alarm, never looks back at the door. He just continues on and walks out. He ultimately will pass multiple police officers without notifying them of what took place. It's the reason that I've called on the Ethics Committee to further investigate this. He received a municipal citation at the D.C. level, not a federal charge. But I think there's a lot of questions to be answered, in particular by the House Ethics Committee, in particular whether or not he was acting to delay a floor procedure. It sure looks like he was. Why was he doing that? What was his intent? Sure looks like he was trying to slow down the action on the floor at a moment in time when the Democrats were delaying a vote on the floor to try to allow the Democratic-led Senate to get their legislation done before the House. I think ultimately a further investigation is warranted.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have to ask about the penalty. I mean, $1,000 fine. I personally know people in high school who got stiffer penalties for doing the same crime when we were in high school and they weren't prepared for a test. But I have to wonder, this almost seems like a microcosm of what we have been talking about. It seems like it's practically been the theme of this show, which is a dual tiered system of justice. Obviously, this is Congress. This is the legislative branch. But do you think if Democrats were in the majority and it was a Republican who pulled the fire alarm, if there would be the same treatment?
It raises a whole host of questions, just as you said. I mean, one, Jamal Bowman was a principal at a school. At every school that I've ever attended, you have fire alarm drills. And so he knows exactly what happens when you pull a fire alarm. It was clearly not an accident or a technique to open up a door. The other is it's the Washington, D.C. Attorney General that moved forward with these charges. The federal prosecutors chose not to move forward with any charges. And I think it's pretty evident that Democrats are soft on crime. And so the Democrat decision not to charge Jamal Bowman with a more serious crime, I think is indicative of what we're seeing play out across the country. Blue cities refusing to enforce the law in rising crime in those blue cities, Washington, D.C., Chicago, other cities across the country are suffering under Democratic policies.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So you were kind enough to host us out in Wisconsin for the Republican convention. We had a great interview, I think, at a restaurant in Waukesha. When we were out there, everybody was talking about the economy. I know the numbers sounded good today when the monthly growth reports came out, but it seems like everyday Americans do not feel good at all. Is this a pocketbook election we're about to head into?
Well, when you talk to everybody across the country, as we did in Waukesha and Kenosha or Janesville, my hometown, what you see is immediately people aren't able to keep up with rising costs. And over the time of President Biden's term in office, costs have outpaced the people's wages. And as that's the case, it's harder and harder for families to afford the things that they need. The average and median home for someone to get into a new home has skyrocketed. Grocery prices remain high. The Biden administration's war on energy has made gas costs, home heating costs continue to increase. And so I think people should hold the Biden administration accountable for their disastrous economic policies. And I think ultimately, as we look out 1 year from now, the American people will hold Biden accountable for failing to move this country forward economically.
Sir, I wanted to dig in on some of the numbers because I know one thing that you tweeted about was the price of a mortgage and that figure of $1,200 and how that's been doubled under President Biden. But we also had on Budget Committee member Josh Rakeen on the show, and he talked about how Americans, a family of four on average, is spending $1,200 more per month for the same goods and services prior to the Biden administration. Americans are getting absolutely pounded by this, and you've got this figure of GDP growth, but there's a new trend in the Biden administration of revising downward. Do you think that's going to happen again?
Well, the Democrats are going to have to try to reset people's expectations. They love to redefine words and move the goalposts along the way, but I think your stat is exactly spot on to the broader problem. Costs are going up and people are paying more for the exact same stuff that they were paying for simply 2.5 years ago. Wages haven't kept up with that. And so your average family of four or any American family is looking at their budget and trying to figure out what's going on. What's going on is actually shockingly straightforward. It's the inflationary environment that President Biden has put us under. It's the reckless spending in Washington. It's the war on energy that the Biden administration has conducted since the first day in office when President Biden killed the Keystone XL pipeline. It's they're paying people not to work after the pandemic ended. And so we continue to see failed economic policies coming out of the Biden administration that are moving the American public further and further behind. And the frustration you see building up is a direct result of the fact that people are struggling to get by with President Biden in office.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We're day 2 of the Speaker Johnson era of the House, and I want to get your take on what you think the most important priorities will be for the Republican Congress. Speaker Johnson put out, I think, a lot of great ideas yesterday: border, economy, inflation, and accountability, and of course, shrinking the debt and the spending. What do you think will be the top successes that you'll be bragging about a few weeks from now as this train gets rolling?
Speaker Johnson's a principled conservative. He may not have been a household name to everyone across the country last week, but he's well known here to those of us who work with him day in and day out. I think his initial speech, as he took the speaker's gavel and set forward his agenda to move forward on our spending bills, to control spending, but also to highlight conservative policies, things like securing the U.S.-Mexico border. He also spoke about a broader debt commission to say we need to have a broader conversation, not just on discretionary spending, the 12.5% of money we spend a lot of time on, appropriate to spend time, but also on the 75% of the federal budget that's on autopilot every year. A willingness to have that adult conversation with the American public is essential. He's willing to do it. He's a strong, principled conservative. And I think we have a big opportunity here to get our spending under control, inflation down, secure the border, and then also, while we're doing that, examine our foreign policy, speak from a position of strength, and in particular, stand with our ally Israel.
Yeah.
If y'all can accomplish all those things, I think that will be a victory lap. But I think about a quote that my dad told me once about boats. The first day that you buy your boat, or the best day of your life is the day you buy your boat. The second best day of your life is the day that you sell the boat. And I feel like the best day of his life is the day that he gets the speakership. Maybe the second best day of his life will be the day that he leaves the speakership, because it's a tough job. What are going to be some of the toughest decisions for him? We've only got about 45 seconds.
Yeah, he's got an incredibly tough job. The position of Speaker of the House is probably one of the most difficult political positions in the entire world. Pulling everyone together and unifying the conference is something that I think he can do, but that's also going to be the challenge. He is a thoughtful, principled conservative. That's what we need, and I think that will give him the opportunity to pull us together. If we're successful at staying together, then we can actually challenge the Biden administration and successfully address the spending, the border, and stand with our allies.
Yeah, so very important. I know the people of Wisconsin have a high degree of confidence you're working in that direction, sir. Great honor to have you on. We look forward to having you on again real soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, former FBI Assistant Director for Intelligence, Kevin Brock, one of our good friends, he's going to help us referee those two big bombshells, the one from Chuck Grassley, the one from Jim Jordan last night. We're going to find out what the FBI was really doing in the Hunter Biden investigation right after these messages.
Welcome back, everybody. Last night, just as we came to air, John broke 3 major news stories over on justthenews.com. And here's the brief recap. The first was the historic day of unity by the Republicans as they voted unanimously for Speaker Mike Johnson. The second was the fact that a former U.S. attorney told the House Judiciary Committee the FBI kept even the mere existence of the Hunter Biden laptop from his investigations. And the third was a bombshell revelation that came from a new letter authored by Senator Chuck Grassley's as it regarded the FBI having more than 40 informants on possible criminal activity involving the Biden family. And lucky for us, we are rejoined by one of the good ones who has risen through the ranks at the FBI. He is the former Assistant Director of Intelligence and a friend of our show. We love having him on. Kevin, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Amanda. Thanks for having me. Hi, John.
Hey, hello.
Kevin, I want to press in on a very important article that you wrote last week regarding Hamas and their style of attacks and the possibility that it could happen here, because I think that we here in America, we suffer from normalcy bias and possibly recency bias, because even 9/11 was 22 years ago. And a lot of those factors that contribute to our confidence that it's not going to happen here, competency at the State Department, strength of the executive, pragmatic foreign policy, strength of military, a lot of those factors have been compromised. And one of the things that you honed in on in this article was a new tactic by Hamas, these paragliders. Now, we have already seen the Biden administration allow a Chinese spy balloon to fly practically clear across the United States. And I think about, outdoor amphitheaters, Soldier Field, NFL stadiums, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade coming up next month. And that concerns me a lot because we have a lot of open air things that happen here in the United States. And if they can do it there, and if Joe Biden allows the balloon to happen, it can happen here.
Amanda, exactly. And the concern that I had after listening to President Biden's speech last week was that we're focused on the Middle East, on the Ukraine, and we know now that there has been a intentional surge of military-aged young males from countries that are either state sponsors of terrorism or up to 170 of them who are on the terror watch list that were confronted at our borders. Those are the ones that were caught. We don't know about who else might have been able to get into the country. When we have that kind of vulnerability, then the attack from Gaza on 10/7 becomes even more jarring. It was a kind of a new strategy where masses of young men came in well armed and just started shooting up civilian populations. Could that happen here? Well, in light of the information that we have, the sudden surge of individuals coming from hostile nations, I think we have to be wary about that. And as I mentioned in the article, I would like to see the FBI and the CIA determine whether there's operational significance behind the surge, and then let's find these people and make sure that they're under investigation and can't cause these kinds of problems. Because, as you point out, we have a number of soft targets in this country where, like the attackers from Gaza, know that the population would be less armed and less able to defend itself, and that's a scary scenario.
Yeah, it really is. Director Wray, I think, signaled that he is concerned. He was with all of the leaders of the Five Eyes countries, gave a pretty compelling interview and statement. What's going on behind the scenes? Typically, what would the FBI be doing at this moment, knowing that there is this potential for an operational threat?
Yeah, so ideally, and the director commented on the threat of lone wolves, but this goes beyond that. This would be an organized attack by individuals who would have been placed in the country as an attack cell, who would come together en masse like they did in southern Israel. That's my concern. If the FBI logically would want to know, all right, who has been confronted at the border, and then get information as to where those individuals are now, and then launch a nationwide investigation through its 56 field offices to develop sources to determine who is here now that we may not be aware of from specific countries. The FBI knows how to do that. They should do that.
Yeah, important.
Kevin, if we can't identify these people within our borders, then Americans need to know how to protect themselves and what to do in instances where a threat exists. And I think about, you no longer active within the FBI, and John's story, former USA Brady, as investigating the Bidens, former, and I keep hearing this, and I just keep hoping that not all the good guys are former, that they are still active in their organizations. But with respect to the threats that we have here on the ground, if you were still in the FBI and you were putting out a memo to Americans saying, this is what to look out for, this is what to avoid, what advice would you give them?
Well, obviously, the issue of guns in the United States is a very controversial, very emotional issue. Just last night, the horrible shooting in Maine, is galvanizing the country one more time. But the jarring thing about what happened in Israel was that Hamas knew that their victims were going to be unarmed. Inexplicably, the Israeli government policy restricts private gun ownership in that country, despite the fact that all of their adults have had military training and would know how to use weaponry. So I would never take a position that Americans shouldn't deserve the opportunity to be able to defend themselves, particularly from a terrorist attack like this, where you're out and minding your own business and conducting yourself without thinking that there's going to be a fearful attack. Americans have to be wary. Unfortunately, that's the situation we're in right now, and I would never counsel people to not arm themselves if they felt like they had to.
Yeah. Kevin, I want to turn just quickly to the Biden investigation because there's these pretty extraordinary revelations, at least they feel extraordinary to everyday people, but 40 informants or more than 40 informants providing information of possible criminality on Joe Biden, and then a claim that FBI whistleblowers don't think it was treated seriously or thoroughly investigated. And then the U.S. attorney, Mr. Brady, saying the exact same thing, which is, hey, I actually did some corroboration of some of the stuff. The FBI didn't seem to want to cooperate with me. I know you've had a chance to look at some of that. Your takeaways from those two explosive revelations.
Well, it's getting more and more difficult for Americans to believe that there's something wrong with the system right now. You take the totality of what you just talked about, 40 informants, which by the way, that's an amazing amount of informants working one issue in the FBI. That's, you hear about that when it's a nationwide investigation of some large criminal gang or something like that. So I'm wondering whether there might be a garble there, and that it's not 40 reports, but if it's 40 discrete confidential human sources, that's an indicator. That's an indicator that there's information out there that people want to provide about wrongdoing. When you have the number of whistleblowers come forward that we have that are worried that certain information is not being treated the way it should be, whether it's FBI agents or IRS agents, you look at the totality of that, and then you look at the totality of the reporting that we've had and what's been reported that's come off the Hunter Biden laptop. There is more than ample indication that there may have been criminal violations by members of the Biden family, to include the president himself, that deserves robust investigation. But that's not what we're hearing. And there's concern among people who've been involved in these investigations, people trying to do the right thing, people, line investigators and line AUSAs trying to push this investigation along, but being met with resistance. Why is that? I hate to say it, but I'm wondering whether we can come to the conclusion right now that this Department of Justice is just not going to pursue the Bidens. It's not going to happen. And logically, you look at a DOJ that was willing to do a search warrant raid of a former president who is going to be the political adversary of President Biden in 2024. And you look at a DOJ that was willing to to an early morning raid of journalists who were holding on to a $20 diary of the president's daughter, then you can reasonably conclude that we've got a Department of Justice here that's about willing to do anything on behalf of the president.
And 40 more confidential human sources. It makes you wonder if Fani Willis is trying to throw racketeering charges at the wrong president. It's unbelievable. Kevin, you are truly one of the very few who retired from a 3-letter government agency who we actually trust, and we are so grateful every time we can get you on. You don't want to go anywhere, because when we come back, Jason Foster of Empower Oversight is going to be here. Be right back.
Welcome back, America. Our next guest has been a champion of whistleblowers like none other that I've met in my career. For 2.5 decades as one of the most accomplished investigators in Congress, he worked with whistleblowers to expose enormous wrongdoing, and then he founded the Empower Oversight Whistleblower Center, which has brought to life so many allegations and so many serious problems, from the FBI to those famous IRS whistleblowers that we've had a lot to say about on the show. Jason Foster has been fighting there, but last week, he found out something disturbing about himself. He found out that the Justice Department was spying on him while he was investigating the Justice Department as a congressional Senate investigator. He joins us now to bring us up to speed on that. Jason, great to have you back on the show.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
Last Friday, you get a notification from your phone company. It's got to be pretty disturbing. Tell us what happened, what you found out, and what concerns you most.
Sure. So I woke up on Friday morning to a notice from Google, which I got about 1 o'clock in the morning, that on one of my Google Voice telephone numbers that said that they had complied with the compulsory process from the Justice Department, and attached was a copy of a grand jury subpoena dated September 12th, 2017. So 6 years and a month or so ago. And it sought all toll records, call logs, text logs, et cetera, for that particular phone number. The particular phone number that I got the notice on was one that was actually used by my wife, forwarded to our home phone and my wife's cell phone not something anybody ever would have contacted a reporter on. Presumably, this is related to, given the time frame of the dates of the information they were asking for, it looks like it may be related to a leak investigation, that it might be related to the leak investigation of the Carter Page FISA, which, of course, I had access to as a Judiciary Committee staffer in March of 2017. They asked for all my records from December 2016 through May 1st of 2017. But they couldn't possibly have had a predicate or any actual reason to seek the phone records, related to that particular number, because there was never any contact with any press on that number.
Unbelievable.
Leads me to ask, because, this may seem like a lay perspective, but it kind of feels like all that we have learned about the DOJ and maneuvering, the political maneuverings, and even agencies like the FBI, it feels like if you are investigating a Democrat or you're poking around possible corruption of a Democrat, you need to use a burner phone and a dummy email.
So one thing I don't know is whether or not that they actually got the contents of the Verizon cell phone that was issued to me from the Senate, on which I would normally do, my business, right? That I would speak to the senator on, that he would call and text me on, et cetera, or that I would have authorized contacts with the press on. So we don't know whether or not they got that information, because I haven't gotten any kind of a notice from Verizon, and it's my understanding that they don't have any policy of sending out a notice like Google does. So the only reason that I know is because of the Google notice. But since receiving the notice, I have learned that the Inspector General has an investigation open on this matter, looking at the predicates and the sources and methods of gathering information on congressional staff in a number of leak investigations that the Justice Department conducted. And I should be clear that this is not just me. I mean, there's at least a dozen or more other staffers, both Republicans and Democrats. What it looks like occurred is that there was this extremely broad dragnet of searching for information on everyone in the executive branch, with the very, very thin justification that they wanted to see all the personal emails and communications logs for everyone who had access to the particular information that leaked. Well, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of people in the executive branch who also had access to that information before Congress did. There's people at the FISA court, clerks and so forth, who all had access to that same information. So the question that it naturally raises is, well, did you do the same thing to all of those people, or did you just subject the people who were on your oversight committees to this extraordinary scrutiny?
Yeah, that is a very important question, one I know you're digging to get the answer to, because you filed a FOIA today to press the Justice Department to turn over all of that information. How important is that to starting to get some transparency? And by the way, do you think Congress will also dig in on this?
Yes, I mean, I've had, so as far as I know, I'm the only one to go public on this latest round of notifications. I know that Kash Patel, a former Nunes staffer, had gone public on a similar notification that he got last December. Right. But I know from my contacts with folks at the Senate Legal Counsel's office and at the Inspector General and just former colleagues on the Hill, that there are several other people that got a similar notice, both when Kash got his and when I got mine. It's just that most people aren't, coming out and being public about it. But there are lots of questions being asked behind the scenes, and that will continue and will probably be asked in public shortly by oversight authorities in the House. It's really, this is not a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's an institutional issue. It's Republicans in Congress. It's people on, it's not just people on Senator Grassley's staff. It was people on Senator Feinstein's staff. It was people on Senator Schumer's staff. It was, it's extremely broad and without any sort of real predicate or reason that we are aware of. And I know there was no predicate for one of the particular phone numbers of mine that was targeted.
Yeah.
Jason, if I could, I just want to dig in on a couple of these dates, because there was this very contentious meeting in January of 2018 with Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein. And in that meeting, he threatened to subpoena records from House Select Permanent Committee on Intelligence, threatened to subpoena records from them. But 4 months prior, I think it was September of 2017, we now know they were already spying. What's the reason to threaten that if he knew he was already getting that information?
Well, it's a very important and insightful question, right? Maybe it's because Mr. Rosenstein didn't know. And that's important because there are rules in the Justice Department that require advanced senior level approvals when you're gathering information on attorneys, people in the press, people in religious organizations, for constitutional reasons, right? And there ought to be those same enhanced procedures for when you're looking at congressional staff, senior congressional staff, or members of Congress or senators. So those are some of the issues that the Inspector General is going to be teasing out. But it's quite possible that this was, you have to think about the time frame that this occurred, right? So this is the date of my subpoena was September 12th, 2017. Comey had been fired in May. McCabe, his deputy, was leading the FBI there, not in a Senate confirmed position, for all of that summer when they would have been preparing and gathering the information that was ultimately put in this subpoena to Google to get my records and the records of my Democrat and Republican colleagues. So, you had, sort of the permanent government doing what it was doing. I guess technically on the date that the subpoena for my stuff was issued, Director Wray was confirmed, but I mean, he'd just been very, very recently confirmed. So he's going to be up on Capitol Hill next week. I'm hoping he'll get some questions about that. I'm hoping that others on Capitol Hill, will dig in. I called the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, which is who issued the subpoena, and asked to speak to the assistant U.S. attorney who signed the subpoena. And I left several messages last week and this week, basically just asking, hey, the Google notice says that there was a court order that said this had to be secret for 6 years. I'd like to see that court order. What's the basis for keeping it secret from me for 6 years? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I haven't received a response.
I bet the customer service probably wasn't that good. Jason, you do such amazing work all day and all night. Next time we get you on, I want to talk about the Marcus Allen case more. You had a big development on that. We've run out of time, but we'll get you back on real soon. Such a great honor to have you on. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Philip Patrick here to talk about the economy from our good friends at Birch Gold Group. We'll have that right after these messages. Welcome back, America. A lot of signals lately have been a little confusing on the economy. Today, the Biden administration announced that the GDP grew in the last quarter at 4.9%, a lot higher, almost double what was expected to do. On the flip side, you hear a lot of the big names in investment, people like Jamie Dimon, saying we're about one click away from a downfall in our economy. Here to help us sort all this out is our good friend from Birch Gold Group, Philip Patrick, who always has the right answer. Philip, great to have you back on the show.
Oh, thank you guys for having me as always. It's great to be back.
It is great to have you. So you take JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon on one side saying this could be a dangerous time for the economy, and then you hear the numbers. Where is the truth? Somewhere in the middle?
I'd say more on the side of Jamie Dimon. Look, the government are coming out trying to tout the strength of the economy using GDP. As we know, in large part, this is driven by inflation, right? Rising costs means people are paying for more activity. But at the end of the day, it's a reflection of inflation, which is very, very close to that 4.9% number. So it's the same nonsense we've been hearing for the last couple of years. Jamie Dimon, head of the biggest bank in the world, probably someone we should be listening to. And he's definitely concerned in the current climate.
Yeah.
And translate that for us, because we actually often talk about how it's a national security threat. The economic situation in America obviously has exploded now that we are 33.6 trillion in debt now. And this was actually something that the new House Speaker spoke about yesterday. He said that's the biggest threat to our national security. Can you kind of bridge those two topics for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that vehemently. At the end of the day, it weakens us, right? It limits our ability to spend on defense. Think about something. Debt service payments went up 33% from last year. Our debt service payments alone are basically equivalent to our national defense budget. As interest rates go up, as debts mount, that becomes more and more problematic. On top of that, look at the relationships we're having to make around the world. They're absolutely right. Then look at manufacturing, right? We were at a point a little while ago when we couldn't make any more Javelin anti-tank missiles for Ukraine because we didn't have access to the chips due to supply chain issues. So there's a lot of problems on the horizon, but I think debt is probably the biggest ticking time bomb, if you will.
Yeah, it seems as though this administration has been unable to read inflation right or address it. Every time we thought, oh, we finally tamped it down, boom, it pops right back up. Why does this administration have such a hard time seeing the inflationary pressure and then addressing it?
Look, I think, first of all, a lot of what they say is just to suit their own political interests. I don't think they're that stupid, right? That they don't know inflation is a ticking time bomb. The other problem is we don't really have the tools to address it, right? The Fed tried earlier in the year. They raised interest rates quite aggressively. They managed to temper inflation and start bringing it down. As soon as they did that, though, something breaks. And earlier in the year, it was the banks holding treasuries. They got squeezed, and that was that. The other thing limiting the Fed's ability to be aggressive is this ticking time bomb of debt, right? The higher interest rates go, the higher those debt service payments become, and it starts to cripple the government. As I said before, I think the government or the Fed will choose to save the banks time and time again over saving individuals and cost of living. So for me, higher inflation is going to be our reality globally for the foreseeable future.
Philip, numbers are typically black and white, but you can manipulate numbers to say pretty much anything you want. And that 4.9% figure, like you said, due to inflation, and the American people, I think know that. They know that what they are feeling is not 4.9% inflation. You've got a 4.9% growth, almost 18% cumulative inflation. We now are at record highs for credit card debt. A recent poll showed 76% of Americans feel that they are either worse off economically or in the same boat. It doesn't matter what numbers the Biden administration puts out there, unless they can do something to improve quality of life for Americans. People are going to be yearning for the days of, 1.6% under President Trump?
Yeah.
Inflation?
And you're absolutely right. The government can come out and push whatever numbers down people's throat. I speak to a lot of people about their finances, their personal situation, and everybody out there knows that inflation isn't at 3.7%. And like you said, it's what we feel. And the big problem that we have at the moment, wages are trailing inflation and people are suffering, right? Like you said, credit card debt over $1 trillion, defaults happening across the board in auto industry, homes, mortgages, So it's a tough situation across the board, and Americans are feeling it. So the government can come out and tell us whatever they want. But as you say, until things start feeling better, the American people are not going to be fooled.
Yeah, I think that's right. I want to turn to investment strategies. I was on the phone with one of my friends the other day, and he said, oh, I'm riding the roller coaster. I said, oh, I'll call you back when you get back from the amusement park. He said, no, I'm just looking at my investment fund. It goes up one day, goes down the next day, up one day, down. And he was going nuts. I said, oh, now I get to what you're saying. If you're someone like Jamie Dimon who knows what to do, what's the right thing right now to protect our money and our investments in this really volatile moment in the markets?
Yeah, it's a very, very tough climate, right? It just is. And we've discussed this before because the options are limited, right? The ability to sit in cash and ride out an inflationary climate where the world is running away from the dollar doesn't really work anymore. And I think commodities and in particular precious metals tend to work very, very well in climates like this, given the problems that we have. But I think one of our biggest issues, which we've discussed before, is this flight away from the US dollar, right? It's happening across the world, and I think it's going to be very difficult to stop that train once the wheels are in motion. So that's where precious metals come in, right? They are designed for climates like this. The same inflation that erodes our buying power drives gold and silver up. As dollars devalue, gold goes up. So I think commodities have to be a part of everybody's portfolio today, and I'd be very surprised if Jamie Dimon at $1.7 billion net worth doesn't have a fairly significant exposure to the commodity market as well. I think it's a reflection of where we are. Like I've said before, if central governments around the world are buying more gold than any years in history, it's a sign for us to follow suit.
Yeah, and you make it so easy at Birch Gold. That's why we're so proud to have this partnership. If people want to get a free, no cost, or no obligation information kit, tell us how they do that with Birch Gold.
Yeah, it's really simple. You text America to 989898. let me start that again. We text Just News to 989898. Again, Just News to 989898. It's been a long day. Thank you guys
that's a good
very
one.
much.
Just News 989898. I can remember that. That's a good one. Philip, we love having you on. We always get the straight talk. And you look back over the last 2.5 years, every time we've talked to you, you've been right on the money. We're so grateful for that advice.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, my friend. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in a few seconds to wrap up a pretty busy news day. We'll be that right after this.
Welcome back, America. John, before we turn things over to Grant Stinchfield for the next hour, I want to touch on something that I teased at the top of the show regarding recruitment in law enforcement. And we know that almost every police department across the country is dealing with recruitment numbers. And, the pay has never been great. The benefits have never been that great when you weigh it against what's happening right now culturally and the demonizing of police. And as I just learned, there is still a defund police movement active here in Los Angeles. And I look at the story that we were talking about, how many of those officers specifically in D.C. are making more than $100,000 based on just overtime pay. And it's more than the mayor in some cases, which we could have a whole other conversation about the fact that police officers, I think, deserve more money than mayors anyway, but that's not a part of what we're going to be talking about. But it's the issue is recruiting and having enough manpower on the streets to adequately, or try to get even close. I mean, on January 6th, they didn't adequately, but get close to adequately protecting. And it's very, very sad to see. I mean, it's great for these officers that they're making overtime pay, but it is a very, very abysmal sign.
Yeah, listen, and these officers are going to be tired. If you're working that many hours, you're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week to do it. And God bless them for stepping into the void. But the void was man-made. It was created by politicians who decided that they were smarter than common sense and let's defund and demonize police. And of course, when something happens like it did last night in the tragedy in Maine, you want your law enforcement out there. And there are more than 1,000 officers in Maine right now putting their life at risk trying to find that horrible gunman. And at that moment, you're reminded, these guys put themselves in harm's way. We demonize them, and yet we need them more now than ever. The Democratic folly is really getting exposed, and there's really no place for Democrats to hide in this issue. They made these crises. I'm grateful that there are officers willing to work those 60, 70 hours to give us some sense of security, but this is man-made. We had a situation, if we didn't demonize cops, we'd have a fine police force, and people were loving, there were so many people that were going into police enforcement when Donald Trump was president. And it's an interesting thing. A lot of the cops leaving the blue cities, you know where they're going, right? They're going down to Florida and Texas where they're respected. So there's lots of great, there's no recruitment problem in Florida or Texas. Maybe the rest of the country should take note.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I always feel like police officers and firefighters, nurses, it takes a very, very special breed of person to do those types of jobs. So if you're not getting, if it is a thankless effort, I don't know what incentive there is. Okay, let's move on to something that we broke here on the show. Marjorie Taylor Greene introduces a resolution to censure Rashida Tlaib over, let's face it, a lot of different things. This was specifically pertaining to her anti-Israel comments, but, she basically put out a CTA, a call to action, misreporting on the misreported news about the Hamas hospital that turned out to not be true. Your thoughts on it, John?
Well, listen, Democrats have a discipline problem right now. They got Jamal Bowman, as Chairman Steil just reminded us at the top of the show. They got Rashida Tlaib and other members of the squad. By the way, Bowman is a member of the squad. So there is a sort of a rebel rousers crowd that is really causing political discomfort for the Democratic Party. But you know what? This is a long time coming. These antagonists, I like to call them, in the squad, they've said and done things for a long time, and now it's starting to finally have some consequence. I think Congressman Bowman's going to find a lot more consequence before we're done. And I think the censure resolution almost certainly will pass. And maybe a few Democrats will cross over. That'll be a big moment. And so, the crazy thing is the Democratic Party is hurting itself with its own people. It's self-made again. They embrace this part of the party. Now they got to own it.
Yeah, they have outsized power in the Democrat Party that is not commensurate with their actual strength in numbers. I think they would like to think of themselves as House of Cards, but they're a little bit more Mean Girls. especially with the Jamal Bowman maneuver. I mean, that was just so petty and immature. All right, Ford and UAW reaching a tentative deal to end the strike. With all of the news happening right now, I have to admit that I forgot that a strike was even happening, but we're going to stay on that. We'll probably have some news on it tomorrow. John, I think this was a successful hour, so we want you all to join us again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern, as we are here every Monday through Friday here on Real America's Voice. Grant Stinchfield is going to take you through the next hour. Everybody have a wonderful night. God bless you. See you then.